Welcome everyone to another episode of Financial 15, the show where Kevin and I try to provide some information, something that'll improve your situation. Do all that in 15 minutes or less. Today, we're going through a common question, one we get quite often, is should we add our child to our home, make them a joint owner? We're going to go over 3 reasons why to avoid doing exactly that. Some good information. You want to stick around.
Yes, as Clint mentioned, another topic that we actually get a lot of questions on in regard to what should I do with joint ownership and things along those lines. This video, you can always find this and anything related to it or any of our other videos on our YouTube channel. Please go there, like, subscribe, whatever you can. Sign up and be a member. You get a lot of information out of it. If not, please also check out our website at beckerorr.com, or also you can like us on Facebook. Lots of content there, lots to help you out with your financial situation going forward. Now, 3 reasons why we're putting this on. Clint, what would be any of the reasons why we would want to put a child on joint ownership on our home? What are these?
Yeah. Before we go over why we're avoiding it, we should probably understand why people do it in the first place, right? Because there is some rationale to why someone would want to do this. We should mention we're talking about the home. We're not saying a cottage or rental property. We're talking about the principal residence. We're also talking about joint ownership with rights or survivorship. There's lots of types of joint ownership, or 2 main ones. We're talking about with rights of survivorship. Why would someone do this? Well, it makes things easier for the estate. You pass away, it just transitions to the surviving joint owner. In this case, it would go right to your child. It also bypasses probate, so you'd avoid probate fees. So there are some positives. There are some reasons people would think about doing this and putting a name on the house, but it's not that simple, is it, Kevin? There's always going to be some drawbacks, things you have to consider. I'll pull one of them up here. 3 reasons to avoid putting your child as joint owner on your home. Reason number 1, you're giving up some control.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, a lot of people, when we're talking about this, and as you mentioned, it is your principal residence, your home, and we are dealing with joint right of survivorship. So what you're basically doing when you've done that, you now give up control. You do not have full say over what goes on with this house anymore. It is now joint between 2 people. And with that, you are going to need approval for whatever you want to do with this house. So if you decide that you want to sell it down the road or something, that may not be a possibility if party B, your child that you put on, disagrees with that. You have to have those sort of scenarios in order. So giving up the control where you really had it all on your own, now you've got to split that between 2 people and you both have to be on the same side. So control is a really big thing, especially if you're dealing with your own home, as opposed to, say, the cottage or something along those lines.
Yeah. And another way this could come into play is if you want to access the equity in the house. Let's say, for example, you've built up equity over years, you've paid down that mortgage. Now you want to get a line of credit, or maybe you want to do a reverse mortgage in retirement. Well, it's no longer solely your asset. You're going to need approval of the other party before you can do any of those things. So if you want to access the asset, whether it's through home equity or whether it's through selling it, you're going to need permission because you've given up part control to your child. So important to keep that in mind. Reason number 2 to avoid putting your child as joint owner on your home, and this is a big one, it's exposure to creditor risk. So you bring someone else as owner of the assets, you're going to get all of their baggage. So if they have bad debts, they have a marital breakdown, if they have a business that goes under, bankruptcy, you name it, all of that now comes attached to them being owner of this asset. So it comes with a bit of baggage, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's a big factor to consider, which I don't think a lot of people do. Everybody just sort of looks at, well, I want to make this easier on my estate. I'm going to give this to my kid when I pass, so it's going to go to him. They seem to forget that his entire life is now exposed to that. So yeah, whether he has bad debt, whether he has business relations, whether there's a marital breakup, any of these things become reality. This is now part of his asset structure. So you could lose the entire thing because they have to deal with things through a settlement of some format. So exposure to credit risk is probably one of the biggest ones out there because it's no longer just you, it's now 2 people. So that's one of the main things that we should take a look at. But that's something definitely that people don't consider when they put a name on there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can't just put a name on a house. You can't just say, let's add their name to it, right? If they're going to be joint owner, there's going to be pros, there's going to be cons. This is definitely one of the downsides to having a joint owner on an asset. You're going to get exposure to all their baggage. So if they do have a bankruptcy, well, the creditors might come knocking because they want part of that asset. If their marriage falls apart, well, that asset could be included as part of family property, and maybe it'll be added into the division when they divide things with the divorce. So you have to keep that in mind. That can be a knock against, titles right there. I should repeat it, Kevin. It's one of the reasons to avoid putting your child on the home.
That's correct.
Let's get to number 3 here. And this is one that involves taxes. It's the principal residence exemption.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if it's your home and it's in your name and you sell it, you have what's known as the principal residence exemption. You do not have to pay tax on what your house is appreciated because it is your primary residence. Now, if you've added a joint party with that, all of a sudden, this entire thing is not your principal residence that you get the exemptions for, since you would divide the home basically between the two of you. So you have your section and then your child has theirs. Yeah. And this may not be that scenario. So now there's a tax consequence that may play out into this. This is something that you seriously need to consider before you get involved in drawing up, putting joint tenancy on this with right of survivorship. It is a very big scenario, especially if you were planning on having all that cash to do something else, buying a condo, putting something down in the US if you wanted to look at it, building a cottage, a lot of these things that you could look at one way, now you're going to have to take a different route, won't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the key here is we're assuming the child doesn't live with you, right? If it's their primary home, different scenario. We're assuming they're off on their own. They've got their own property, their own home. They're not living in this home, so it's not their primary residence. So for you, you live there. It's your primary residence. You can claim the exemption. You can sell it completely tax-free, but it's not going to be your child's primary residence. So when it's sold, there could be a taxable component for their half, which means they're now going to have to pay some tax bills that could impact the whole decision, that can change your strategy and what you're intending to do with the proceeds of the sale. So like you said, maybe you want to sell the house, you move to an apartment or a condo, you go to an assisted living facility. Well, if it's only in your name, that's a simple decision. You live there, you claim the exemption, it's all tax-free. You can make that transition a little easier. If they're now on the property and it's not their principal residence, not their main home, well, you've introduced a tax complication to that decision. So something to keep in mind. So we hit 3 reasons there to avoid putting your child as a joint owner on your home. You're going to give up control. You get exposure to the creditor risk. All their baggage comes with it. And like we just talked about, that tax complication, the principal residence. So I think you need to be quite careful here, right? You have to consider the benefits, the drawbacks, talk to the professionals, your accountant, the lawyer. You don't want to rush into this decision.
No, and that's exactly what we're saying. We're not saying don't do this. We're just telling you that these are things that you really need to consider before you do it. Because a lot of time, people just look at the initial scenario. I want to estate plan. I want to make sure my child gets the house, so I'm just going to put them on, and that way everything's solved. They don't have to worry about it. These are things that you really need to consider dealing with. Now, whether you talk to the lawyer, whether you talk to a financial person in front of this, these are steps that you really need to look at first before just, oh, it's a simple process, let's get it over and done with. Because a lot of people don't think about what's in the background. And that's always a key thing, is to think about what's in the background. I mean, another thing we haven't sort of mentioned is we're dealing with this scenario on possibly having one child. What if you have more than one child? All of a sudden now, this could be another problem that you have to deal with estate-wise, but that's a topic for another area, and we can deal with that at a later time.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have more than one child, that just gets very complicated. You can have 3, 4 owners of a house, which would be a bit of a mess, or you'd have an issue with equalization, right? If only one's on the house, but what do all the others get if that one person gets the house? But you can see here, it's not as simple as just adding a name to the property. You need to make sure you consider it very carefully, the pros, the cons, make sure you talk to the professionals, and then you can make an adequate decision. So you don't want to rush into it. There definitely are some drawbacks and reasons you might want to avoid putting your child as joint owner on your home. So we went through that rather quickly. It hit 3 reasons to avoid doing that. If you have more questions, well, where do you want people to go, Kevin?
I want people to go and visit chatwithclintonandkevin.com. By all means, if it's questions on this, if it's questions on joint ownership, if you want to deal with it compared to a cottage or something along those lines, we're more than happy to answer that, or any of your other financial questions that we can get to. We very much want to see what you have, and then that way we can give you the responses that are necessary. Again, this has been one sort of a basic for 3 reasons. There are more that you could probably deal with. And again, we're not saying don't do it. We're just saying consider all the possibilities that you need to look at before you do it. That's the main thing to deal with. Otherwise, I think that's all we have to cover for this topic. Until next time, anything for closing words, Clint?
I think we covered it all. Everyone stay safe and take care.